Ever feel like, I don't know, like maybe the weight of the world is just a bit much sometimes? Like every time you turn around, there's a new crisis, a new thing to worry about.
Right.
Well, today we are diving into a book that kind of throws down a counter argument to all that.
Okay.
We're looking at Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now.
Uh-huh.
You shared some excerpts from it, and I gotta say, it's pretty thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught in that negativity,
Right? Yeah.
But the fascinating thing about Pinker's book is he doesn't just say, hey, be more optimistic. He brings like a mountain of data to back it up.
Right.
He really digs into this idea that humanity is actually making incredible progress,
Yeah.
even if we don't always see it.
It's like he's saying, yeah, put your phone down for a minute, stop doom scrolling, and actually look around. Exactly.
Because things might be better than they seem.
Yeah.
And he starts with this really interesting story about a student who's struggling with, like the big questions. Like, what's the point of it all if science can explain everything?
Right, right.
And it really gets at that kind of existential dread that I think a lot of us feel.
Absolutely. And Pinker's point is that acknowledging those feelings, that's not a denial of progress.
Okay.
That's actually a key part of what the Enlightenment was all about.
Interesting.
It's about understanding our limitations. Like we're not perfect,
Yeah.
but by recognizing those limitations, we can actually design better systems.
So how does that work? Knowing our flaws helps us make things better.
Okay, so Pinker uses this concept of cybernetics to explain it.
Cybernetics, okay. And it sounds complex, but an example makes it clear.
Okay, yeah. Give me an example.
Imagine like an animal,
Yeah.
right? It's hardwired to chase a squeaking sound because that might mean food.
Right, instinct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also flees from barking because that could be danger.
Right.
Now, this animal isn't like consciously strategizing, if I chase the squeak, I'll be fed, therefore.
It's not thinking that deeply about it.
No.
Yeah.
But its actions, even if they're instinctual, they're still driven by these goals of survival, of sustenance.
So even without complex thought, there's still this goal-oriented behavior happening.
Exactly. And Pinker argues that we humans, we're wired in a similar way.
Okay, so we're not always rational, but our actions are still pushing us towards something.
Exactly. We might not always be perfectly logical,
Yeah.
but our actions are driven by these deep-seated goals. And that often results in progress, even if it's not always intentional. Recognizing this helps us design better systems, whether it's social systems, political systems, whatever it might be.
No, it's not about being perfectly rational all the time. It's about understanding that, like, we've got this programming, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And then we can work with that.
Yeah, and this ties into a common criticism of the idea of progress, which is that, it just happens naturally.
Right, like it's passive.
But Pinker argues it's not passive at all.
Okay.
He has this great analogy. He says, just because your laundry pile is smaller doesn't mean the clothes wash themselves.
I love that.
Someone had to put in the work.
Yeah, somebody did the laundry. So when we talk about societal progress, like, who or what is doing that work?
Right. So Pinker digs into these various driving forces.
Okay.
He talks about things like what he calls the pacification process, which is basically the decline of violence over centuries.
Okay.
Now, it's not that humans suddenly became less aggressive. It's that as societies became more centralized, incentives shifted.
Right. It's not beneficial to be constantly fighting anymore.
Exactly. It's more beneficial to cooperate.
Right.
And so that, along with things like what he calls the civilizing process, less cruel punishments and stuff,
Right.
and the humanitarian revolution, this increase in empathy, these all contributed to a more peaceful world. Understanding those processes is key to making sure the progress continues.
Because if we don't understand what causes positive change, how do we keep it going?
Exactly.
But it feels like Pinker also realizes that progress isn't always like sunshine and rainbows. He talks about the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, it was groundbreaking, but it also came with a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And that's where this idea of unbundling comes in, which Pinker talks about.
Unbundling, okay.
So he argues that we can celebrate the good parts of progress, in this case, the technological advancements,
Right.
while also acknowledging and addressing the bad parts.
Yeah.
Like the exploitative labor practices that often came along with it.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't throw out a delicious cake just because the edges are a little bit burnt, right?
That's a good point. Never thought of it that way. It's about recognizing the complexity. Okay, so let's talk about some of those wins, those good parts.
Okay.
Because Pinker lays out some pretty compelling data that really challenges all that doom and gloom we see all the time. Yeah. For example, a huge decrease in famine deaths over the past 150 years. Like, it's actually mind-blowing.
It's incredible. To really grasp it, you almost have to see it visually.
Okay.
Figure 7-4 in the book. It shows this decline, and it's really striking.
Wow.
It really highlights how far we've come.
And it's not just about having enough food, right? Like, Pinker shows how these advancements, even if they seem totally unrelated, can build on each other in these really unexpected ways.
Right. There are these fascinating connections.
Like, did you know there's a link between the barometer, like the thing that measures air pressure, and the steam engine?
It seems strange, right?
It does.
But Pinker explains that scientists were trying to create a more accurate barometer.
Okay.
They needed to figure out how to create a vacuum. And in those experiments, they stumbled upon the principles that led to the steam engine.
So, like, this seemingly simple invention paved the way for one of the most important technologies ever.
Exactly. And it just shows how progress often happens in these really unexpected ways.
Wow. And then there's light. We completely take it for granted.
Totally.
But Pinker talks about how much the cost of light has dropped. And I don't just mean, like, cheaper light bulbs. I mean the actual human labor that it took to have light.
Right.
This economist, William Nordhaus, he figured out that back in the day, an hour of work could only buy you a few minutes of reading light.
Wow.
Today, that same hour buys you thousands of hours of light.
It's amazing to think about.
It's incredible. And it's not just about having more stuff. It's about what we can do with that freed up time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pinker's point is that progress has given us this incredible gift of time.
It's like he's saying, like, hey, instead of complaining about your commute, think about people a few generations ago who were working for hours just to have enough light to read a single page.
Puts things in perspective.
Yeah, big time. But speaking of modern anxieties, happiness, Pinker talks about this weird paradox.
Yeah, what's that?
So we've got all this data showing that objectively, like, our well-being is up, we're living longer, we've got more wealth.
Right.
But then you look at these happiness surveys and they're kind of flat.
Interesting.
Especially in developed countries like the U.S.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's like we're kind of victims of our own success, you know?
What do you mean?
Like, we're so used to things getting better that we forget how good we actually have it.
Right.
Our standards have just risen so much.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But it does make us susceptible to this thing called relative deprivation.
Relative deprivation. So, like, even if we're doing better than, say, our parents or grandparents,
right,
we still feel like we're falling behind because we're comparing ourselves to.
Exactly. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
To people who might have even more.
Exactly. And that can make us feel unhappy, even if objectively our lives are pretty great.
It's all relative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pinker actually talks about this research by Stephen Rose, who found that even though the income gap between the rich and the poor, you know, it has widened.
Right.
Americans are still moving up income brackets over time.
Oh, interesting. So even with the gap, there's still upward mobility.
Exactly. Rose uses this example of the poor classification.
Okay.
Often, it's defined as like a $0 to $30,000 income for a family of three. And that definition hasn't changed.
Right.
But people who fall within that bracket today, they have a higher standard of living than those considered poor a few decades ago.
So even the poor are getting richer, in a sense.
In a way, yeah. It's a good reminder that progress doesn't always mean that everyone benefits equally.
Right. Or even at the same pace.
Exactly. It's complicated.
Very complicated.
And it's easy to get caught up in that complexity, especially when we're talking about issues that are really emotionally charged.
Like what?
Like nuclear war, for example.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'll get the heart rate up.
Right. Pinker actually argues that decades of like fear-mongering around nuclear war have been largely ineffective and often misleading.
Okay, so is he saying we should just like throw caution to the wind and pretend nuclear weapons aren't a threat?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's not about ignoring the threat. It's more about understanding how our fear response works.
Okay.
Often our fear is way out of proportion to how likely something actually is.
Give me an example.
Okay, so statistically, you're more likely to die in a car crash than a plane crash, right?
Right, statistically, yeah.
But which one are people more afraid of?
The plane crash, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that image, that vivid image of a plane going down, it just triggers a much stronger fear response.
It's like our brains can't tell the difference between a scary news story and an actual threat.
Right, and this is especially true in the digital age.
Oh, for sure.
When you've got, like, fear-mongering headlines everywhere you click,
It's hard to escape it.
Pinker argues that we need to get better at, like, being critical of the information we consume.
So be more skeptical.
Yeah, especially when it's playing on our fears. Don't just immediately believe everything you read.
Good advice in general, I think. Okay, but what about the information itself?
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Pinker talks about the two cultures.
Right.
What's that all about?
So he uses this term to describe the divide between, like, the sciences and the humanities.
Okay.
And he's not saying they're opposites or anything, but he argues that they approach knowledge and understanding from very different angles.
In what way?
Well, science is all about data, logic, empirical evidence.
Right, like hard facts.
Exactly. But the humanities, they focus more on subjective experiences, emotions, cultural interpretations.
Okay, so it's not just like science versus art. It's a deeper difference in how we see the world.
Yeah, exactly. And Pinker says this divide can even lead to misunderstandings about progress itself.
How so?
Well, imagine someone who's very deeply rooted in the humanities. They might see, like, the horrors of war or social injustice and think, see, progress is an illusion. Things are terrible.
Right, I could see that.
But then someone with a more scientific viewpoint, they might look at the data on declining violence or advances in human rights and say, no, look, things are actually getting better.
It's like they're looking at the same picture but seeing totally different things. So how do we bridge that gap?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Pinker argues that a good place to start is with a humanistic approach that's still grounded in reason.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of entro, evo, info. Like, these concepts can help us make sense of the complexities of, the 21st century.
Entro, evo, info. Sounds kind of like a sci-fi movie or something. Break it down for me.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually pretty straightforward. So entro refers to entropy, which is like the tendency towards disorder in the universe.
Okay.
Evo is evolution, the force that creates complexity, adaptation.
Okay, I'm following.
And info just stands for information.
Okay.
And information is key because it helps us understand both entropy and evolution, maybe even control them a little bit.
So it's about recognizing that we're not just along for the ride, that we have the power to actually shape the future.
Exactly. And that's really at the heart of what Pinker's saying. We have agency. Progress isn't guaranteed, but it's possible if we approach these challenges rationally, with compassion, and with the belief in our ability to innovate.
It's both empowering and a little daunting, right? Like, it's on us.
It is, yeah. It means we have to confront our own biases, challenge what we think we know, and be open to changing our minds when we're presented with new information.
And speaking of new information, I mean, Pinker doesn't shy away from these huge challenges we're facing.
No, he doesn't.
One that really stood out to me was climate change.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know about you, but sometimes it just feels so overwhelming.
It really does.
Like, what's the point of even trying? But Pinker says that giving into despair isn't the answer.
He says that we can't let fear paralyze us.
Exactly. And he actually cautions against what he calls apocalyptic environmentalism.
What's that?
It's that tendency to paint this picture of the natural world as, like, totally broken beyond repair.
Okay.
But he reminds us that nature is actually incredibly resilient.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, it survived asteroid impacts, ice ages, volcanic eruptions.
It's tough.
So it's not about downplaying the seriousness of climate change, but maybe approaching it with a little more
hope.
Yeah, with a sense of, like, pragmatic optimism, like, we can tackle this.
Right. And Pinker points to past environmental successes as proof that we can do this.
Like what?
Well, there was that treaty in 1963 that banned atmospheric nuclear testing,
Oh, right.
which basically eliminated that threat of radioactive fallout.
That's a big deal.
Right, and that took global cooperation.
So it's possible even without, like, a world government
Yeah.
to come together on these big issues.
Exactly. And there have been other successes too, like remember acid rain?
Yeah,
International agreements helped reduce that significantly.
that's right.
And in 1987, they banned chlorofluorocarbons.
Which were destroying the ozone layer.
Exactly. And that ban, they're expecting it to fully heal the ozone layer by the middle of this century.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So there are these positive examples.
Right. And Pinker sees these successes as setting the stage for things like the Paris Agreement on climate change.
Which, it's not perfect. It has its critics, for sure.
Of course.
But it's still a step in the right direction, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Pinker acknowledges that finding solutions is messy and complex.
Mhm.
Like, he talks about how we need to move beyond these simplistic narratives about sustainable development.
What does he mean by that?
Well, for example, he says that a lot of these narratives don't take into account the practical realities of what it takes to lift people out of poverty.
Okay.
Like, people need access to reliable energy.
Right. And that's not always easy with, like, traditional green solutions.
Exactly. And that brings us to a topic that tends to make people really uncomfortable: nuclear power.
Yeah, nuclear power is definitely one of those topics that can really divide people.
It's definitely a conversation starter, if not always a comfortable one.
So where does Pinker come down on this? Is he pro-nuclear? Anti-nuclear?
He actually comes out pretty strongly in favor of it.
Really? Even with all the, like, baggage that comes with nuclear
He
power?
acknowledges the fear, absolutely. But he really wants us to look at nuclear power through this lens of, like, reason and data.
Okay, so not just letting our emotions dictate how we feel about it.
Exactly. And in the book, he makes this really bold claim. He says that nuclear power is actually the world's most abundant and scalable carbon-free energy source.
Wow, that's a pretty big statement. I mean, what about the risk of accidents? The waste disposal problem?
He tackles those concerns head on. Like,
Mhm.
he doesn't shy away from the history of nuclear accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima, obviously.
Right.
But he argues that modern nuclear technology is just in a completely different league in terms of safety and efficiency.
Okay, so he's not talking about bringing back those giant concrete domes that everyone pictures when they think of nuclear power plants.
No, not at all. He's talking about these next generation technologies.
Like what? Give me an example.
Things like small modular reactors or SMRs.
HMRs, okay.
They're designed to be inherently safer. They produce way less waste, and they can actually be built in factories and then shipped to where they need to go.
Huh, that does sound different. But what about the waste issue? Because that seems to be, like, the big sticking point for a lot of people.
It's a valid concern, but Pinker argues that when you really get down to it, the volume of nuclear waste is actually tiny compared to other industrial waste.
Okay.
And there are already ways to store it safely. There are even ways to recycle it. He says the real problem isn't so much the technology itself, but the politics and the fear surrounding it.
So we need to be more open to having, like, a real conversation about it, weighing the risks and benefits.
Exactly. And that actually connects to one of the overarching themes in Enlightenment Now, the importance of critical thinking in general.
Being able to look at things objectively without letting our emotions completely cloud our judgment.
Exactly. Question your assumptions, look for evidence, and be wary of those overly simplistic solutions to really complex problems.
You don't just believe everything you read.
Right. Be an informed citizen.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom with Pinker, right?
Yeah.
He also talks about all the good stuff, all the ways that progress is making our lives better, often in ways we don't even think about.
Absolutely, like all the advancements in technology that we just take for granted now.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. We're carrying around these smartphones that are more powerful than, like, supercomputers from a few decades ago.
It's mind-blowing when you really stop to think about it.
And it's not just about having cool gadgets, right? Like, these things have really changed the way we live our lives.
Completely. We can communicate with anyone, anywhere, instantly. We have access to all the information in the world at our fingertips. And then there's all this automation that's freeing us up from these tasks that used to take up so much time and energy.
So we have more time for the things that really matter.
Exactly. More time for family, for friends, for hobbies, for just relaxing.
It's about reclaiming our time and using it in ways that make us happy.
Exactly.
And we can't forget about medicine. Like, the progress there has been incredible, and it seems like Pinker is really passionate about it.
As he should be. I mean, we are living longer, healthier lives than ever before, and that's thanks to countless scientists, doctors, researchers. Think about it. Diseases that used to be a death sentence, we've eradicated them.
It's amazing when you put it like that. We're really lucky to be alive at this point in history.
We really are.
But it's easy to forget that sometimes.
It is, but it's important to remember.
It really is. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway from all of this? What does Pinker want us to do with all this information about progress and the challenges that come with it?
I think his main message is that we can't just sit back and passively wait for progress to happen. We have to be active participants.
So it's a call to action. We have to actually do something with all this knowledge.
Exactly. Embrace those values of reason, of science, of humanism, because those are the tools we're going to need to solve these big problems.
And starts with each of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It starts with you, with me, with everyone listening. Question what you think you know. Be open to different perspectives.
And have those tough conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Because that's how we move forward.
Exactly.
And remember, progress isn't inevitable. It's not a straight line. It's messy. It's complicated. There will be setbacks.
There will always be challenges.
But we can do this. Humanity working together, we can create a better future. So remember, you're not just a bystander in this story. You're writing it. What kind of story will you write?